to the right.
Something's going on. If it's not.
Willie, why are you recording? You're
I was looking for stuff online recently, and that kind of would summarize all the things that you've been involved in. And the best thing I found was actually on this on the Bandcamp site for V Effect here. This stuff is apparently collected under this banner.
That's me.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I don't know, last year sometime, I realized that Bandcamp might be a way that I could, frankly, get rid of a bunch of physical objects that I have. A lot of copies of the V Effect record, an album that the band Fish and Roses that I was in made that didn't get much attention or distribution. A CD that I'm proud of that I made with the band Timber. All these things, are around here. Bandcamp is really a great platform that allows you to easily distribute digital music, and then if you have the guts and the time and energy to do the mail order stuff, it can help with that too. So it's
well, you also had to do the transferring, right?
Well, actually, of these, it's 4 projects really that I've put up there, right? So there's the Fish and Roses, our 3rd album, which was called Dear John. But that was a CD, so the transfer is easy. Transfer from CD. The V Effect one was the one that I had no options really, and luckily, through a friend who was a fan, I got a hold of a really nice transfer that somebody had made. So somebody else did that work for that one. The Timber thing is a CD as well. Well, I'm spacing out. What's the 4th thing that? Les Batteries, which was also a CD. So yeah, that part wasn't that much work. Honestly, the biggest headache is shipping. But
so the stuff that you have on your Bandcamp site, you offer it as a digital download or physical media. Everything is available in physical media too.
So far, I mean, I there are a bunch of things that I've been involved in over the years that unfortunately never made any physical objects to go along with the music. So eventually I think I'll probably put some other things up, but I did, the initial impetus for this was honestly to help me clean out the closet a bit.
Sure. And in your little bio list there, of course, you listed the band Blinding Headache, which is how you got on my radar, because Blinding Headache is the band from the No Wave days that ended up playing at Giorgio Gomelsky's Zoo Manifestival. So let's get a little into your early days. Were you doing anything in music before the No Wave period hit New York?
No. So my father was a jazz drummer, and it still is kind of mystifying to me how little music I was exposed to as a kid, in spite of that fact that here my dad was at the same, he was in the Air Force, and we moved around a lot. But for a period in my early life, he was continuing to play drums, but I didn't. But he was doing that. We were living in San Ardo, California. I don't know if you know where San Ardo is. It's near King City. It's a tiny town in the half desert there, central, right over the mountain from Monterey, basically, or
So we're talking like Bakersfield area, that kind of thing?
not quite that far south. But anyway, we were living in this small town, and Dad had gotten out of the Air Force for a period, and he was teaching school. He was teaching the entire third and fourth grade of the town of San Ardo in one room, both grades. And on the weekends, he was occasionally going up to Oakland, where his parents lived, my grandparents, and staying with them while he did music gigs. So he was playing drums freelance on the weekends while working as a school teacher. So I saw his drums because he kept them in my grandparents' place. So I saw his drums, but I never saw him play. And it seems weird to me as a musician. Music is like central to my life. I've actually gone through a period where we didn't have a good stereo here at home, and it was very painful to me to not be able to just like play music when I feel like it. So I didn't really have a lot of music in my early life until I got my own radio and started hearing stuff on the radio, and then started buying records. So I did play some clarinet in elementary school, a little bit, but I really wasn't a musician, and I didn't really think that was something that was accessible to me until well, I may have told you this before. The band Pere Ubu, when I first saw them, which was in I think late '76, but maybe early '77 at Max's Kansas City. Hearing their early records and seeing them was a big catalyst for me, a really triggering thing, realizing that you didn't have to have normal technique to be a musician.
Right.
A lot of people I know, were kind of inspired, or some people I know were inspired by the punk explosion and the idea that, all you need is a guitar and a couple of chords and you can write a song and start performing. But somehow that didn't click for me. It took Pere Ubu to put it in a different angle. So yeah, seeing this big fat guy yelling and banging on metal, or Alan Ravenstein way in the back with no keyboard but just knobs, turning them and making these great sounds, that was like permission for me. And
So you gotta back up a second here. How do you get from the middle of nowhere, San Ardo, California, with almost no musical background, to Pere Ubu at Max's Kansas City in New York City?
Well, so as I said, my dad moved around a lot because of being in the Air Force. We lived in the Midwest. We lived in California. We lived on the East Coast. And by the time I was in high school, we were living in Delaware. And by then, I had my own little stereo, and I was starting to listen to music on the radio. And Philadelphia had a really great FM radio station. It was sort of the the peak of FM radio in the early 70s, and Philadelphia had a great one, WMMR, which I think the radio station still exists, but it's probably really devolved at this point. But in 1972, I'm telling you, I'm pretty sure I got the call letters right. WMMR in Philadelphia was a great station. I heard on that station, I heard Captain Beefheart a lot, amazingly, because actually Michael Tierson, who was a DJ on there, was actually friendly with Don Van Vliet. And I also heard Fairport Convention and Pentangle and T-Rex and David Bowie, who was also really big in Philadelphia early. So a lot of that was a super important thing for me to have that access to that radio station. That turned me on to a lot of stuff. Also, Rolling Stone magazine was, something that I was reading and picking. I wasn't like buying everything that they were trying to sell me, but I remember reading about Fleetwood Mac at the period of Then Play On, and thinking that's something I want to hear, or The Move. I remember reading about that band and focusing on buying their records because of a review in Rolling Stone. So those things were big for me, and and then record stores also were a good source of information and stuff. So I started to become a music fan.
And did you have buddies you were sharing this musical taste with?
Yes, I had moved to Delaware in the middle of sixth grade, and I met a couple of people then who throughout junior high and high school hung out with and shared interests, and so Zappa and the Mothers was something that me and my group were interested in, and Beefheart, and then from some of those guys I was exposed to the Bonzo Dog Band, or I don't know what else, but we had yes, everybody sort of influencing each other and amplifying our interest in cool stuff, and not just.
At what point?
Not just music,
Yeah,
film too, and avant-garde film. We were in Wilmington. We were close to Philadelphia, as I said, but also to Newark, Delaware, which is where the University of Delaware is, and they actually had a pretty thriving scene of presenting cool, interesting music and film. So saw a lot of avant-garde film, actually, a bunch of Brackage film, and some of the other early experimenters in American cinema. But musically, I remember the great experience of going to a concert at the University of Delaware. It was John Cage presenting Ursula Opens playing the Etudes. I think it's called Etudes Australis, which is a piece that he wrote based on star charts. So yeah, in the early 70s, I had the opportunity to see something like that, thanks to that situation. And also, there was a local in my suburban neighborhood. There were some guys who had a local band. So I was exposed to young people actually making music and learning how to play cover songs. They were focused on Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. That was like their thing. So I was into it too, because these older guys were wanting to play that. So I heard all of that period, or that kind of genre, and knew a lot of that stuff thanks to them. They branched out from CSNY to like maybe what they had one song by Cream that they covered, and one by Spirit, but they were pretty limited in what they were doing. But one of those guys was a little broader in his tastes, and I remember him being when I told some of these guys that I had heard this band T-Rex and I really liked them, they were all just aghast, like, what, that glam stuff, you don't want to mess with that. And I was like, what are you talking about? I like this. And he was much more approving. And I think he was the first one to mention Roxy Music to me. And so that was like, from T-Rex, from Bowie to T-Rex to Roxy Music was a step for me, and became a big fan of Roxy Music.
Sure.
Had the chance to see them when I was in high school, at least once.
With Eno or without?
No, I don't believe Eno ever toured the U.S. with Roxy Music.
Yeah, you might be right. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that he never did. So no, this was actually somewhat later. It was around the probably Country Life album, so their fourth album or fifth maybe. Anyway, yeah. So music started to be really important to me in high school. It came time to like go to college. I knew I wanted to do it in New York. I mean, there was just like no question about it. I looked at, I was a smart kid, and I was very much focused on mathematics. And I ended up getting a partial scholarship at NYU. And I considered a few other things, but that was just so attractive to move right into the heart of New York City and go to college and study math and experience New York City. So that was what I did.
And were you on your own for the first time then?
Yeah. I'm the oldest of three kids. I was always pretty independent, so that didn't, I wasn't shocked by that step. But I also wasn't really well prepared for college, and studying seriously. I was, as I said, I had some abilities in math, and I was kind of I was ahead of the program that I took the first year. So that allowed me to kind of coast, which dovetailed very much with going out and hearing music. And then music just kind of took over. So my first year, I got great grades in college. My second year, I tanked. And then I just sort of like had to struggle to just like keep it together. But that's so not as interesting as the music.
Did you graduate?
I did not, and I dropped out of NYU twice because I went for 4 years and didn't get a degree, and then feeling bad about all the money that my parents, even though I had a half scholarship, there's the other half my folks paid for, so
Right.
I feel bad about that, and I did try with my own money. I went back a second time, and kind of the same thing happened. I was just like, I got better things to do.
Right. Well, yeah. So one of those better things would be playing music. So you go from listening to music to playing it. How does that transition happen?
Well, as I said, it wasn't from punk. Very soon after moving to New York, I was seeing television, Talking Heads, Patti Smith, the Ramones. I was going to CBGB, weekly at least, maybe a couple of times a week. So I was seeing a lot of the punk explosion in 1976. I was buying the records by the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Saints. So I was really fond of and interested in punk, but that music didn't make me want to play. It may have made me want to, but it didn't give me an idea of how I could until I saw Pere Ubu. And then I really wanted to, and luckily, I knew a couple of guys who played guitar, and we just started jamming, just sort of working on stuff. I didn't have any drums or anything, but in the basement of our dorm, there was a boiler, like an abandoned boiler down there, and I guess I had a stick or two, and we just went down there, got high and just started banging on stuff. They were semi-accomplished guitar players. I mean, they weren't great players, and but we worked on stuff. They had a few ideas, and so did I, and we made some music together, and that turned into Blinding Headache. We started playing, once we decided, let's get out of the basement. We didn't try to get a gig, but we started playing on the street. And people, some of the no wave, the classic no wave bands saw us. I should step back a little bit, because another thing that is very important here was that my high school girlfriend also moved to New York like a year after me. So in 76, her name is Julia Gorton. And if you, anybody who delves into the no wave scene and starts seeing the pictures, the photographs of the bands, and especially the portrait things, pictures of Lydia Lunch and Arto Lindsay and Mars, and the Contortions, you'll start to see these photos that Julia took. She is one of the main documenters of that scene. She and I made a fanzine together. We were inspired by the British fanzine Sniff and Glue that this guy Mark Perry did, that was focused on the punk scene. And we, again, we weren't musicians, but we were loving the music, and we wanted to be somehow part of it. So we thought, well, let's do a zine, and we started that. It became it was called Beat It, and through that, because Julia was a great photographer, even as really just a college kid, she started making connections with people, and we started writing about the bands we were seeing, and through that experience, we started to meet some of the musicians, and the no wave people kind of became our friends. We looked up to them. They were a little bit older, most of them. Lydia was not. She was our age, maybe even younger. But so we started to see them and write about them and take pictures of them, and they very much inspired our band, Blinding Headache. So we were kind of sort of the second generation of the no wave, the sort of the younger siblings of some of those bands.
Sure. So are there any copies of the zine you were doing still around?
It's rare, and I mean, seriously, people pay crazy people pay money for that stuff. Julia just published a beautiful book. She self-published an incredible book. I actually literally just got it a couple of days ago, and I haven't had a chance to totally look through it, but it's beautiful, and it has a ton of her great photos of everybody I've just been talking about.
Great. Do you know how people can find it?
So her name is Julia Gorton, Gorton, and if you just Google her name, I'm sure you will find her website, and she's selling it through the website. But yeah, I know she had a lot of them made, and she's sending them out, and people are buying it. So I hope that she makes her money back from it. But
Sure.
It was a labor of love. I understand that also.
Right. So you start screwing around with a couple of friends of yours in the dorm basement, and then you take it out onto the street, literally.
Yeah.
And then you start connecting with some of the other DIY / no wave people. And this is really early phase of no wave, where it really doesn't even have a name, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody was calling it that. Everybody recognized that Teenage Jesus and Mars and the Contortions and DNA, and the Theoretical Girls and the Gynecologists and various of the other bands associated with Bronca and Chatham. People recognized that there was something different about this
Sure.
group of people. They weren't,
Yeah.
they weren't like playing at, I love the Sex Pistols and the Ramones, but structurally what both of those bands were doing, was not a big break from rock and roll, from Chuck Berry,
Right.
and no wave was.
Right.
And what made that happen? Why a bunch of people happened to come together in New York and really want to do something that dramatically different? It's hard to say, but New York itself is part of that story. I think just
Sure.
the crazy variety of lifestyle and experience that people have in this town. It's yeah. I mean, I'm not somebody who thinks that the rest of the world is lacking. There's that famous New Yorker cartoon of what New Yorkers think the world is like. It's like
Right.
Manhattan and then the rest.
Right. Well, there's always whatever new is happening more in New York. It always seems, I mean, sure, it is happening everywhere. When no wave was happening in New York, well, this would be later for me. I came to San Francisco in '79, and right away I dove into, it wasn't called no wave here, but it was the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
There were people, who didn't really know how to play their instruments, making music and playing whatever dive club they could play in. And it was interesting, and it attracted an audience. And it definitely did come from an outgrowth of punk. It was that punk attitude that kind of made it okay to do this.
Yeah. And, I also, just because you use the phrase, not know how to play their instruments, I got to say that while that is an apt description of many of the people involved, at least at first, some of them, like, really, I think it's notable. Just like look at somebody like Arto, okay? Somebody from a distance, or from a certain perspective, I could imagine somebody listening to what Arto Lindsay does and say, this guy can't play at all. That's so untrue. He is a master of that instrument, doing that what he does.
Sure, but he didn't start out as a master. He started out
he
as
made
a guy
his own
screwing
music.
around with an instrument.
Yeah, and but my point is just that, you know, people took it seriously. We were, you know, Arno, you know, worked on that. He didn't just like stay at that first level of just, I got a guitar and I'm going to scrape on
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
And you know, and there's other people involved in it, like Don Christensen, the drummer of the Contortions. That's not somebody who doesn't know how to play. He is a great drummer. I mean, Tim Wright of DNA is an inscrutable musician. It is, I don't know what Tim was doing or what kind of thought process it was, but nobody plays like that. And it is rigorous and precise and beautiful. So,
Well,
you know,
yeah. Well, I guess I would say that, and it was exactly because they came from a non-musician background when they went into doing whatever it is that they would develop later. Because of that, because they didn't take music lessons in a traditional way, they did, you know, they started from a clean slate and developed something completely new.
yeah, yeah. However it happened, you know, it is a special thing that
Right.
So anyway, so we were playing on the street. The no wave, our no wave big brothers were watching us, and we got invited to do some gigs thanks to that. Blinding Headache, our very first gig on a stage, was thanks to Mars. Mark Cunningham, I ran into him on the street, and he said, "We're putting on our own show at this place, Irving Plaza, and you know, would you guys like to open the show?" And we said, "Sure." That bill ended up being Blinding Headache as the opener. The second band was Made in USA, and then Mars headlined. So Made in USA, of course, later also played at the Zoo Manifestival, as did Blinding Headache. And although I didn't even like interact with him the day of the gig with Mars, David Zanzinski of Made in USA, the sax player at the time known as David Levine, David and I ended up playing together in V-Effect much later.
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, we'll get into the Zoo Manifestival and how it brought all these people together. But before you get to the Zoo Manifestival, when you go from the basement to the street to the stage, how is your musical setup changing?
Very slowly, by adding another thing that I can bang on. So as I said, at first I didn't have a drum. I just was hitting this rusty old boiler in the basement, and you know, I probably you know, I think we talked earlier about Zappa, and so probably, you know, on Weasels Rip My Flesh, I'm trying to remember the tune where all of a sudden, you know, the band quiets down and Zappa starts kind of bragging, I guess, about how the band is playing in like 5 meters at once. We have the guitar player playing in 5/4, and you know, that was like a thing for me. I was like, what's he talking about? I don't really understand what what he means here, but then I started to listen and kind of understand it. And so I think inspired by that and listening to, avant-garde classical music and stuff, I became really interested in trying to play in odd meters. So among the very first things that I made my two guitar player friends do was play something that I wrote out very crudely, not in normal musical notation, but just in some kind of scrawl that was in 5/4. So, but of course we had no chops, so we had to play it really slow. So it was just like bong, 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 bong. And, so that was the first thing. So I needed a few sounds. So Willie had my friend Willie Klein, one of the guitar players, had a friend who used to play drums, and he just grabbed a floor tom, I think, from that guy. That was my first instrument, real instrument. And then I had maybe I bought a cymbal, and we had a dressmaker's dummy that I could put the cymbal on. I didn't have a regular cymbal stand, but I put it on that. So that became sort of our shtick, was this dressmaker's dummy. That was an emblem of Blinding Headache. So really, the progression at first was not so much musical as sonic. I got one drum, then I got another drum, then I got one more. And I never, as I built it up, I never got a hi-hat because they were kind of too complicated and I would have to use my left foot. And I just thought, I'm going to just stick with right foot on the kick drum, and I don't need that thing. Hi-hat always, when a drummer, I was so often seeing jazz drummers who I would enjoy, but then I would note this thing where so often the role of the hi-hat was just keeping time, just this timekeeper thing. And I'm like, I don't really want to hear your metronome, I'd rather you just lose that thing. Later, of course, I heard about Bill Bruford also not using a hi-hat. I think at Robert Fripp's insistence.
Yeah. I know Fripp hated cymbals.
Yeah. So, anyway, I know I'm not alone in questioning some of those normal things of the drum kit, but
Sure.
And
did you play it? Did you play it sitting down behind whatever you would call a kit that you had created?
Yeah, yes, I did. Eventually by the time, even in Information, my second band, I had developed a fairly normal drum kit, but without the hi-hat.
Sure.
And it changed a bit over the period when I was playing. So through Information and V-Effect and on to Fish and Roses and Run On and Les Batteries, the kit developed, and I certainly learned to play it better. I had and continue to have some big weaknesses as a player, but I got a lot better. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Sure. And just to give people a little contrast for your style and how it has changed over the years, I've seen some video of you playing recently. I believe it's in $75 bill, and you actually play sitting on a crate. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about that setup?
Yes, I play a plywood crate. To me, that's not, remarkable. The plywood box, or the wooden box, has a long and very valid history in music. The cajon, which I'm not a Spanish speaker, but I've learned that cajon means big box. So caja means box, and cajon means big box. So that instrument, that history of people being the percussive accompaniment to a guitar player, or some other instrument, has a deep history in Latin American music, especially. All throughout Latin America, that's the thing. And often it would be a piece of furniture, a drawer, or a little chest of drawers or something that someone would just start banging on, to accompany a soloist, or a melodic instrument, or a singer even. So to me, that box, not the one that I currently play, which is a replica, but the one that I found on the street, literally walking down the street in New York, it was a natural to me. I saw this thing, I hit it, it sounded good, so I wanted it. And I'm really glad that I grabbed it that day. I don't remember where or exactly when, but I took it and I put it on a shelf, because I didn't really have a plan for it, and I couldn't just bring it into my apartment, so I had to figure out a way. But luckily, it's open in the back, so you can put things in it, so it really doesn't take up much room. So once it was up on the shelf, it sat there for years, until working with my friend Che, we were jamming, and I pulled it down and we started playing, and that, for him, that was like a thing that clicked with what he kind of was interested in doing. And then we started the $75 bill based on those instruments. He was playing guitar and I was playing the crate, and that it was kind of magical, and like really something. I just came from a rehearsal with him, and we were both enjoying exactly that, just the two of us, guitar, plywood crate.
Great. All right, so getting back to Blinding Headache, any story about how you came up with the name for the band?
Yeah, we had, as I said, Willie was or maybe I didn't say, Willie was my college roommate. And we had another roommate, his name was Seth Gunning. Well, his brother was a film scholar, and I think had written a book, or maybe just an article about Buster Keaton. And we were reading some of this, and we discovered from reading about Buster Keaton, that he suffered from blinding headaches throughout a bunch of his life. So we liked the phrase blinding headache. And of course, in the punk time period, a name like that was perfect.
Yes.
And, it was, kind of a joke on our abilities as musicians. But also, if you hear our music, I really don't think it may be boring, it may be incredibly simplistic, but it's really not pain inducing. It's not that.
Not as loud as Glenn Branca?
Certainly not, no.
Okay. All right. So we're talking now about 1978 and this really new and different music that will eventually be called No Wave, being played in New York City now by you and others. And it did get the attention of two producer types, one famously being Brian Eno, who would release the No New York album, which kind of put No Wave on the map. And the other being Giorgio Gomelsky, who is not as well known to many people. And if he is well known, it may be because of his tenure as the manager and producer of the Yardbirds during their heyday in London. But in 1978, both of them are in New York City, and both of them are working with some of the No Wave people. Did you have any interaction with either of them?
Well, you know that I did with Gomelsky, but let's dispense with as close as I got to Eno as I did. So the gig that I was referring to, our Blinding Headache's first gig on a stage at a place called Irving Plaza here. As I said, it was us, Made in USA, and the headliners were Mars. And this was before the recording of No New York. But Mars were already on Eno's radar, and he recorded them that night at that gig. So he was at the show. I'm pretty sure he was out eating Chinese food or whatever while we played the first band. I am quite sure he didn't see us, and I'm positive that he didn't record us, which we were sad about. I mean, we were Eno fans. As I mentioned, I was a Roxy Music fan. I was continuing to be a fan of him and that everything around that band, and I had been a King Crimson fan as well. So
Sure.
The Fripp and Eno collaboration was another thing that I was into. So that's as close to interacting with Eno as I got. Giorgio. So remind me the year and month of the Manifestival.
October 78.
So probably in August of 78, we started seeing these flyers up around the city, around our neighborhood, I should say, kind of announcing this event. And I think it maybe even encouraged this, but we didn't need any encouragement. We saw this flyer that listed a bunch of bands. We didn't know who they were, but then a few that were, things we knew we were interested in. The one that I recall that really piqued my interest was X blank X. As I said, I was a Pere Ubu fan, and so everything related to Pere Ubu was something that I was keenly paying attention to, and so the scene in Cleveland was something that I knew about and wanted to know more about. So I had heard of this band X blank X, and didn't think I would have a chance to see them, but the fact that they were on this flyer was made me very interested. And then we started thinking, well, these bands are playing. I never heard of this other stuff. Why don't we play? So I think my friend Willie and I just walked into the office at the theater. The theater is just a couple of blocks from our home. We were living together, actually. We were roommates. So we walked over there, and the manager of the theater amazingly didn't yell at us to just get the hell out. He was like, well, I'm not organizing this thing, but there's this guy Gomelsky. I'll give you his phone number. And so we called this number, and if I remember correctly, Giorgio answered. And when I said, my name's Rick Brown, I'm in this band, Blinding Headache, he went, oh, Blinding Headache, I've been looking for you, which made no sense to us. And I don't even know if there's any way that's true, but what was true was that he, in his idea of the Manifestival, even though it was very much focused on his new discovery, the people around Bill Laswell and that turned into material. It was focused on them, but also on these people that he was bringing from Europe. He brought the guy Yachko Sefer, who, again, I am not I'm the opposite of a fan of Magma. Everything about them that I have heard and know turns me off. But I guess this guy was at some point in that band, and so that was a big, like, Giorgio was pushing the Yoshiko Sefer's playing, and then he eventually Frith came, and Peter Blegvad. So there was that European aspect to it.
And David Allen was like the headliner,
right.
And Giorgio was helping him put together a New York gong.
So, but along with all of that, and I think I suspect that Bill or some of the other people in his circle mentioned to Giorgio that there's this other thing going on in New York that's starting, and whether the term no wave was used or not, I don't know, but Giorgio was calling it the downtown bands, and I think he uses that phrase on the flyer, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly at the thing, that was the little ghetto in the Manifestival that we were put into, along with was it Arsenal, or they build the band that Rees Chatham.
Yeah, that was part of the No Wave. For people who aren't familiar with the Zoo Manifestival, it was a 12+ hour long music festival that Giorgio Gomelsky put on. And we've mentioned some of the bands here, but it ended up kind of getting divided. Roughly the first half of the festival were the no wave bands, the lesser, or mostly a lot of unknown bands. And then the second half of the festival were some of this European contingent that you were talking about, and better known bands. The US band that was somewhat known was the Muffins. I think they kind of kicked off the second half of the festival.
Yeah, I honestly, my memories of the thing are pretty weak. And I know we played relatively early, but I don't think we were first. So I think there were some things that weren't part of the no wave contingent that were among the very first things of the day. Anyway, so Giorgio claimed he had been looking for us, and so when we called, he was like, "I'd like you to play," and he invited us up to his headquarters on 24th Street, the place that was variously known as Zoo House and Plug, and had some other names. So we went there and met him, and probably met Bill and Fred Marr and Michael Beinhorn, and I recall that Mark Kramer was there, and
Cliff Coltreri was the guitar player.
Yeah.
For them. Did you meet him?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we met all of them.
Yeah,
we didn't strike up a big friendship or anything. Again, when you compare the approaches of Blinding Headache with material, there's a big divergence. Which is about chops and technique, but it's also about just sort of tendencies. Comparing our approaches, it's very obvious that we weren't really on the same wavelength, honestly.
Sure.
I mean, I don't remember what material, or I don't even know if they were using that term. Did they use that name at the Manifestival? Probably not, right?
No, they were called Zoo Band.
Yeah. So I don't remember what they sounded like or what they were doing, but not, once they were material and playing. I mean, I loved what they did, and of course, Massacre, the trio that Fred formed with Bill and Fred Marr was just amazing band. They were so great live. I love the record, but seeing them live a few times was really great.
The festival happens, and all these people come together as musicians, and I've seen the program for it. It's like 10 pages long or so, and the program is also kind of designed as a handbook for people doing avant music. It lists resources for people doing avant music.
Yeah,
do you remember any of that?
I mean, it does ring a bell that there was something, but I don't have a copy of it. I would love to see that if you
sure.
If you can like make a PDF or something of it. I would love to see such a thing.
Yeah, unfortunately I don't think I have one complete copy. I've received like 3 different copies from different people, and none of them are complete. And I haven't been able to assemble what seems like a complete version. But I guess my question for you is, after the Zoo Manifestival, first of all, did you have any more contact with Giorgio? And
yes, I mean, so Blinding Headache played the Manifestival, and thanks to the work that David Soldier did way after the fact, there are those clips available. And I mean, it's kind of embarrassing in a way. Blinding Headache is like so prominent in that list of all that music there. We have like, I mean, that's a function partly of the fact that our songs are like a minute and a half long, typically. So there are a lot of them. Anyway, we played, but we didn't last much longer after the Manifestival. I'm not sure I think we probably ended like very soon after that. And I joined my second band, which was called Information. Both of those bands, by the way, along with our brother band Mofungo, are the 3 bands that were on a compilation that we put together ourselves called Tape Number 1. And so that is something we did posthumously after Blinding Headache had broken up. We made this cassette, and it features the 3 bands because Blinding Headache kind of split. I joined Information, and the other guys formed Mofungo. So that's the connection amongst us. Once I was in Information, we were playing at all the usual New York places: Max's Kansas City, CBGB. We didn't play on the street, but we did play loft parties and weird situations and various things. And Giorgio, after the Manifestival, continued. He had his place on 24th Street. The Zoo Band turned into Material, and continued working there, and that was home base for the Zoo band that went off on the tour, or a couple of tours, I guess, that they did. But Giorgio would put on shows at Plug, and there was a stage and a PA, and I don't really remember the details of how many times we played there. But both Information and then later V-Effect played at Plug. One thing I can say about Information playing there, that it may be of interest to your particular focus. I don't know if we went to him asking for a gig or he actually reached out to us, but the idea was that Nico, he had had some connections to Nico, and Nico was coming to New York, and Giorgio was organizing a I don't remember if it was 3 or 4 nights at Plug with Nico as the headliner, and he asked Information and Mofungo to be the opening bands for her. We were honored, excited, and really curious about that. So we agreed, and we got there the first night to play, and Giorgio said, "Oh, unfortunately, Nico's very sick. She needs the medicine." And we were like, "Okay, I think we know what you mean." He said, "But you guys can play." And then at the end of the night, when it was time to give us our cut of the money, he said that, "I'm going to give the money to Nico because she needs the medicine." So we ended up like supporting Nico's habit for a couple of nights. She did perform the third or fourth night, and it was great. She was a little out of it, but we enjoyed it. She was accompanied by the violinist Timon Dog, who, if people know who he is, it's probably from the Clash album. Is it? I'm not sure. Sandinista, the triple album set. He's on that prominently. That's kind of his most prominent thing. But he was accompanying Nico. I did have a chance to see her again at CBGB. Probably not too much later, but anyway, that was an interesting experience, being the way that she paid for her habit that week.
Yeah.
So so we played, the Information played at Plug, and then later VFX did as well. It was a semi do-it-yourself venue. It's not a super pro scene, but they had a decent PA. And
do you remember what the audience capacity was like at Giorgio's place?
I mean, I would say it would be crowded with 60 people in there. I'm not good at estimating crowd size, but that would be, I think that gives you an impression. It was not a big place.
Sure.
And I think Giorgio lived upstairs. The basement
Yeah.
was a rehearsal area.
Yeah.
That ground floor was a venue, and
Right.
I don't know how long they kept things going, and I don't think we played there beyond those 2 experiences.
He ran it kind of like any small club, right? I mean, did he have a full bar there? You remember?
I don't remember, beer for sure, but and whether and I'm sure that wasn't licensed.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, that, you can tell me about New York at that period of time. There was a lot of clubs like that, right?
Sure. I mean, my friends and me in Blinding Headache, we had a party scene that we put on shows at a couple of different venues, and just actually, if I'm like, we practically gave beer away. I mean, that was yeah.
One way to get people to show up. For you, the Zoo Manifestival was just one of many things going on at the time, and
it was a big.
Pardon me?
It was a big thing in a way, just by the fact of being on such a big stage, and being in the midst of, what was clearly, something was going on. We didn't really know who a lot of these bands were, but there was an audience that was into it. And, so, we recognized that it was an important thing. But we didn't feel like it was our thing exactly. We were kind of in this kind of funny ghetto, as I described it, in the middle of the thing, or in the early part of the thing. And I don't remember any real antagonism towards us, even though an audience that was coming for, say, Peter Blegvad or Magma or the Muffins, seeing Blinding Headache play these very crude, super simple 1.5 minute things with limited technique, it could have turned ugly, but I don't remember any strong negative reaction. I think people were fairly tolerant of it. I think the aggression came out during the discussion period.
Well, yes, the panel discussion of journalists and musicians. Did that happen at the midpoint of the festival?
It must have, because nobody would have stuck around for that junk at the end. Like, no. No. I mean, at the end, I don't think we were there. I mean, I'm sure we weren't there. I don't know how long we hung out. I mean, it was
right.
It would go kind of late, but I think that I'm pretty sure that conversation happened earlier.
And probably the most well-known journalist on the panel was Robert Christgau. At least he was well known in the New York area. And he himself stirred up a lot of the controversy. The recording of the panel is also available on these recordings from the festival that Dave Soldier managed to rescue. So you can hear the panel discussion, and it's very interesting, given all the hindsight we have now, to hear it. Do you have any memories of that discussion?
Not really, only in the broad term. It's not surprising to me that that there was, when you collect that group of people, Christgau had a very rock populist position, so somewhat skeptical of the prog movement and that angle on rock music. Also, not, but at the same time, probably also pretty critical of what we were doing. So, I think Bob Christgau is really a fine critic and observer of music and of rock music, and I mostly value his judgments. I didn't see what he was saying as incorrect or really.
Sure. But apparently it seemed to tick off David Allen, who was on the panel as well. Was it you that told me that he created some scene on the stage towards the end of the discussion?
It wasn't me, but I that sounds right. Yeah, I don't really recall. I thought it was
he did. Oh yeah, I think he stood up with the microphone and put tape over his mouth or something like that. He made some statement. about the proceedings. But anyway, the festival, one way or another, had this impact. And of course, and it was a part of other things that were going on around you at that time. For you, 1978 gives you this musical trajectory that you're kind of still on today. Can you describe for us that trajectory or that journey, that launch pad that 78 gave you, and what your thought processes were, and how it changed your thinking about music and your role in music?
Well, kind of in an echo of what I said about the way my drum kit developed. I feel like each step that I took, from Blinding Headache to Information to V-Effect, and beyond, has added, new experiences and new opportunities to improve my playing. And in fact, leaving Blinding Headache and moving on to Information was partly my ambition to do more, do better, do different things. So each of those steps, from Blinding Headache to Information, I was kind of frustrated at our progress, and I wanted something more. And it seemed that the guys in Information, that it was a band that already existed but needed a new member, and they invited me, and I took the opportunity, and it was an important, a small but important step in developing as a musician. The next one, into V-Effect, was sort of the same thing. Information had played for a few years, and I wanted to do more than I felt like we were doing. And this opportunity to play with Ann Rupel and David Zanzinski in V-Effect came up, and I'm so glad I took it, especially because Ann, in particular, I mean, in things beyond music, in politics and personal relationships and things, both David and Ann were influential to me. But when it comes to music, Ann is the one who really kicked my ass, in a very nice way. But she's such a great musician. She pushed hard, and I grew a lot as a musician from working with her, and being in the band, and working with Fred on the recording of the band as well. All of that. So V-Effect was a real step forward. And I've had a few experiences of working with a particular person who's brought a new perspective for me, and it's always been those things that have helped me move forward. So from V-Effect, when that ended, the next thing that I did was to work with my wife, Sue Garner, on the beginnings of our band, Fish and Roses. And Sue is from the South, had experiences herself of being in a kind of no wave-ish group, but really wanted also to bring in, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think she wanted to explore harmony singing and singing and some country-ish elements. So that weird mix of her impulses and my thing was really the beginning of our band Fish and Roses. We then, my college friend Dave Sutter, who was an aspiring jazz piano player, we said, would you consider like playing organ, since piano is like an impractical instrument, and also really, somewhat limited when it comes to the timbres and stuff that we were hoping to do. So we talked Dave into playing organ, and that was the beginning of Fish and Roses. That went along for a while. When that ended, Sue and I pulled back to the two of us, and our friend Alan Licht, through playing on bills together or knowing bands that each of us had been in. And we asked Alan if he would play with us. Alan's a little younger, and he brings a whole other angle. Alan had studied for a while with Henry Kaiser, but he was also Alan was also an accomplished kind of rock and roll player. So he had a sort of pop side that he was showing in a band that he was in, but he was also clearly interested in experimental music, and Alan's made quite a name for himself after Run On, as a soloist and a writer, because he's a really good cultural observer, I think, of music. And so there was that. Along the way, I met Guigou Chenevier, and Guigou had the idea of a drum. Originally, his original idea was a drum quartet, and he wanted Gérard Marcoeur, one of the Marcoeur brothers. I don't know if you're familiar with Albert Marcoeur, great French musician and composer, contemporary of the Étrange Fou and Magma, for that matter, part of the French progressive rock world, which are, honestly, is a kind of limiting terminology for what all of those people do. I think there's a lot more to it. But Guigou's idea was a quartet with Gérard Marcoeur, Guigou, Charles Hayward, and me. And I think he fairly quickly realized that 4 was too much. So he decided to invite me and Charles. And when Guigou wrote me that he had this idea of the three of us playing, I was thrilled, because I liked Guigou a lot and I enjoyed the Étrange Fou records, but Charles was a member of This Heat, and I was just in awe of that band. So the idea, just even getting to meet Charles was one thing, but getting to play with him was very exciting. Sure enough, the three of us, we got together in Paris and spent a week coming up with a program of music, and again, playing with those two guys, two great drummers, really made me have to step up and just improve on my instrument, just to keep up. So that's the sort of thing that's been a recurring thing for me, was finding a situation with great musicians, or great or imaginative people like Sue, like Gigu, like Ann Rupel, like my friend Mark Howell, who I played with in Timber, like my friend Che Chen, with whom I play in $75 Bill. All of these people have just, really inspired me and make it that much easier to, to be creative and come up with some kind of new thing. So
Sure. The band with Charles Hayward, this was a trio of percussionists?
yes. So we, as a trio of drummers, we made an album. It's called Noisy Champs, or if you're French, Noisichon, which is the name of a suburb of Paris, Noisichon. But it looks like Noisy Champs. We made that record together, and we toured in Europe a couple of times as a trio. Gigu organized all of that, and at a certain point, Charles kind of got caught up in other things and left the group. We made a second album as a duo. It's called Des Mesures Révolutionnaires. It's kind of a concept record about the French Revolution. It was a commission, actually. We were commissioned to do something about the French Revolution by the French Museum of the French Revolution, which Gigu had some connections with. And actually, we worked on that music with Charles. A lot of it was composed along with Charles, but the actual recording was done after Charles left. So, and then we eventually made a third record also as a duo. And along the way, in the early period after Charles left, we did some gigs where we had other drummers. Actually, two of the Marqueur brothers at various times were our third. Both of the other two brothers, because they're I recommend that you investigate Albert Marqueur and the Les Marqueurs. But all three of these guys were great drummers, as well as playing other instruments. But eventually, it became clear that even three was too many in terms of the practicality of touring and anything. So we eventually became a duo and made our third record. We made that in the U.S. In Chicago with John McIntyre of Tortoise producing it. Mm. And I'm very proud of what I got to do with Gigu. And
sure. So this music being created by all drummers, can you describe it a bit for us?
Well, I should say that we were all drummers, but it's not just drums on the record. Gigu plays sax as well. Charles plays keyboards and sings. I sing a bit. It's really varied. It's percussion heavy, but there are songs, as I said. Charles is a lyricist. He has a way of playing with words that's quite interesting. I wish that record were more available. It was reissued by Musea, which is a French label that specializes in the prog stuff. And another cool side thing in my career.
Yeah. Going back to the connections of the Zoo Manifestival, one of the biggest, I think, was that Giorgio brought Fred Frith to America. he didn't bring him specifically for that festival, but Fred ended up playing at the festival and meeting lots of people and settling in America after that. You mentioned that Fred was involved in recording V Effect. Can you tell us how he got involved with that?
Yeah, so I did see Fred at the Manifestival, and I knew one Henry Cowell record, but I wasn't a deep aficionado. I didn't really know that band or that music, but I recognized that it was music that was quite interesting. But it wasn't, as I mentioned, it wasn't until seeing Massacre that I really got into what Fred was doing. And then, New York is a small town in addition to being a giant metropolis. So the scene of musicians is kind of, there's a lot of interaction among people. And Fred had associations with some of the people that ran a very small, cool little space in the West Village that was variously called, well, I actually don't remember what else they called it, but it was Mort's. It was 1 Morton Street. And it was a basement space, tiny space, where some of people like Wayne Horvitz and Wayne is the person I associate with it, and I'm sure there are other people, but it was a place where people practiced, I think, and then they put on gigs sometimes. Anyway, we somehow ended up playing a show there, V Effect, and there was this is kind of embarrassing, there was a Japanese group on the bill as well, and I'm very curious now, having sort of learned a little bit about Fred's involvement with the Japanese scene at the time, and also knowing that there's a big interest in sort of the Japanese sort of psychedelic and prog scene of the 70s. So I'm really, I wish I knew who this Japanese band was, but I knew they were friendly with Ikawe. So Ikawe actually played on that bill with them, playing violin, which we didn't know she played violin, and I don't really remember what she did, but not as a drummer, but as a violinist, she participated in the other band's set. But we played first, and I remember getting off stage, and Ann and I were there, and one of the Japanese musicians came up to us and said to us, "Watch your time." And we were very sensitive to the work we were doing on getting our groove together, and really working hard on that, and being careful about tempo. These were things, as I said, Ann is a great musician, and she was helping me with these things. So we both took this comment, "Watch your time," to be about that, like constructive criticism, like, get your groove together, you're okay, but like, start working on that. We quickly realized that wasn't at all what he was saying. He was saying, like, you're like 5 minutes over the time you were supposed to get off stage. It's our time now. When I've told this story to other people, they've said, like, yeah, like in Japan, like you do not like go 1 minute over your time. So that was that point. Anyway, Fred was at that show, and he saw V Effect at 1 Morton Street, and I think Bob Ostertag maybe deserves also a shout out here, because I think he kind of had seen us before and said, "Fred, you should check out this band." Anyway, Fred saw us, And maybe that night or somehow soon after, very soon after, he contacted us and asked us if we wanted to go to Europe. He said that he had just put together this new band called Skeleton Crew, and he had a tour booked, and they needed an opening act, and he liked what we were doing, and would we like to go? And we were like, sure. As soon as I said yes to this, or the next day, I realized, oh shit, what's gonna happen now? I'm on unemployment if I go, because I was between jobs. I thought, if I go on tour, I'm gonna not be able to show up for unemployment for a couple of weeks, and then I'm gonna lose it. But I'm like, this is too good. I'm gonna just do it anyway. And when I came back from tour, I went straight to unemployment, and they were like, "Where you been?" And I was like, "Well, I was on tour." "You mean you were working?" And I said, "Yeah." "Oh, you had a temporary job?" I said, "Yeah, as a musician." And the guy said, "Oh, you're a musician. Do you know David Johansen?" And I was like, "Well, I'm a fan of the New York Dolls, but I don't really know him." He said, "I went to high school with David Johansen." And I'm like, okay, cool. But then he just like rubber stamped my thing. Like, he was a music fan, so he let me go. So I got back on unemployment. But yeah, so that's how we first went to Europe, thanks to Fred. And then again, touring for 2.5 or 3 weeks in Europe, playing almost every night, really helped us get to be better. We came back from that tour a really good band, and soon after we started recording, we asked Fred to help us do that, and we went to Martin Beasley's studio, and we recorded most of it there. We then also went back to Europe without Fred. We went for a second tour, and Elliot Sharp was the other act on the bill. So I played a little bit with Elliot in the opening act, and VFX would play, and we recorded some more stuff that ended up on the album during that tour. So that's how we got involved with Fred, and it served us very well.
Sure. Do you remember what year you did that first recording with Fred?
I mean, it would be around the beginning of '83 would be my.
Oh, okay. I bring this up because so you're with Fred invites you on this tour.
Which would be '82, by the way.
So that's Skeleton Crew and your band VFX are on the tour together. And in Skeleton Crew at this time is a member of the Muffins, Dave Newhouse.
Yep.
Also, who was also playing at the Zoo Manifestival.
Yep.
So again, this is Fred. Fred is making all these connections with American musicians now, and getting together and bringing the American musicians back to Europe.
Yeah, Fred is a super important figure in my musical life, and he was somebody who was making these connections and bringing people together in a very positive way. Yeah.
Right. And I just did interviews with the Muffins, and the Muffins did an album in '81 called 185, and they hired Fred Frith to produce that. And that was apparently Fred's first production work in the studio.
Yeah. I remember that he had already done that when we started working with him.
Right. Well, another connection that you have with a New York band called Curlew with George Cartwright. Can you tell us a little bit about your time with Curlew?
Sure. Here's a story that doesn't put Fred in the best light. Anyway, yeah, Curlew was the band that George Cartwright and Tom Cora were the sort of co leaders of, and they had made at least one record before this, maybe two. I'm not positive. Curlew had somewhat fluctuating personnel in the early days, and well, all through its life. But it was classically George and Tom, and then in addition a guitar player, a bass player, and a drummer. So George was a friend. I was a fan of the band, and my friend Mark Howell, the guitar player, I have to imagine that Mark was invited to join before me, and I don't know that I was even invited to join the band, but rather to work on some stuff for this recording, and I think we had a few bits of rehearsal before going in to record the part of that album that I was involved in, I'm not a quick learner, and I don't have jazz chops, and so my ability to accomplish what was needed for that band was, I really wasn't well suited to it. I think what I did on the record is good, but it's luckily Pippin Barnett was also available, and Pippin is the drummer on a bit more of the record than me. There's actually a typo. There's an incorrect credit on the album, and I don't remember the details of this, but there's a track that has no drums on it at all that I think I'm credited with playing drums, and there's a track that, or maybe it's Pippin is credited with drums on the one with no drums, and I'm credited with playing drums on something he played. So there's a mix up there, but yeah, I'm on it, and I'm happy I had that thing. One of the things I'm most pleased about being on that record about is that Butch Morris and I are both on a track. So even though I didn't get to play with Butch, he came in and overdubbed his part. I do find myself on a song with the great Butch Morris, which is I'm proud of. The negative bit that I mentioned about Fred was that I think recognizing my weaknesses and abilities, Fred had the idea for one of the songs that instead of me playing my part through, he wanted to experiment with having me play each drum separately. This is a dumb idea, and I don't know who. I mean, I don't know who could have done a really good job. I think I did an okay job, but the idea of taking a drum part, which I always say about a drum kit, it's like 10 instruments. You're playing 10 instruments. It's not one instrument. There's all these different things, and you're using at least 2 or 3 appendages to play it. And most good drummers use 4. I don't use my left foot, as I told you. So, but yeah, I don't think that was a successful experiment. That song where each drum was played separately.
Sure.
The idea was the idea was really having these things be separate and therefore controllable separately. Um, it's sort of an amplified version of just the separation of musicians when you record. Put somebody in a booth so that you can mix it. His idea was to kind of do that on a hyper level, and have things, because he had also experienced in Skeleton Crew using a lot of triggers. So they were one of the cool tricks that Skeleton Crew did throughout their life, even later when Xena was the third member, and as a duo, and early with Dave. They had these noise gate devices which they would use to trigger other sounds. So when you use a noise gate with a particular kind of construction, you can use one instrument to open the gate to allow some other sound to come through. So they were using tapes and playing or hitting a switch or hitting something which would send a signal and open the gate so that a chord from an organ or a tape voice or some other thing would open up. So I think these were the ideas that he wanted to try with me playing each drum separately, so he could do something like that. There is a little bit of use of that on the record, but
yeah. I did want you to talk a little bit about, what you're doing now, and we did talk a little bit about $75 Bill. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about, bring us up to date?
Sure. So yeah, well, let's see, up to date. So the bands that I was in, working with my wife Sue and Fish and Roses, and then Run On, and playing with Gigu, all of those things kind of ended at a certain point around 2000. Gigu and I realized that it was just impractical to continue doing what we were doing. Me living in New York and him in Avignon, we were losing money. If he would come over here, it was a guaranteed loss. When I would go over there, with the cost of transportation, even with his best efforts, we couldn't make very much money. And he's somebody who's trying to make a living from music. So it just became impractical. So that ended for me. Run On ended, just sort of petered out. And I got involved in working on electronic music. I was working on computers and making music that way by myself. So I wasn't playing very much. And then I had a stroke. And it was luckily a mild stroke in October of 2001, notably 1 month after 9/11.
Yes.
So that was a big setback for me. I spent the next 6 months, pretty messed up and trying to figure out what I could do. I felt super uncoordinated. Things came back, but slowly. And honestly, I think I missed some opportunity to really jump back into things. If I had worked on it in a different way, I might have been able to recover a lot of my drumming facility. But what I did do was slowly get back into it. I actually played briefly in a rockabilly band, because that was like something that I felt like I could start slow with and do this thing, and that was fun. and got me back just physically playing. And eventually I just started slowly back into it. And my wife and I worked on some music together. We put out a duo record. I probably have the sequence of events mixed up here. That record probably came out actually before my stroke, but anyway, things were weird, and I wasn't sure what was gonna happen with music, but I still wanted to play, and I was continuing to work with computers and do electronic music, and then she and I started jamming with other people. We started organizing a irregular but frequent jam sessions where we would just we have a few people that we would get to and get with and play really acoustic. We didn't want big amps or loud stuff, but percussion and acoustic instruments. So we started doing that, and I had this. I started seeing this band that Che was in called True Primes, and I really liked what they were doing, and I had the notion that he would be somebody that would be fun to jam with. So I started really hassling him, trying to get him to come, and I wore him down. Eventually, he came and started jamming with us, and then I pulled that plywood crate down off the shelf. And that's when he said, I have this idea of some stuff I want to work on, and I think this crate could be the thing. So we started getting together, and we found ourselves very compatible. And that was now 10 years ago almost that he and I started that. We were a duo for a while, and we still play as a duo, but we've started within the first 2 years, we started inviting other people to play with us, and we have now a kind of circle of friends who are really fun to play with. And so we have a version of our group that's a 10 or 11 piece, what we call a little big band, and we've done a bunch of gigs in that formation. We made actually our last gig before the pandemic hit. We got a nice recording of that, and we were able to release. It's called Live at Tubby's, so that's something that was a really cool thing to have happen right at that moment. And we've now recorded actually in a real studio. Interestingly, at Tony Maimone's studio. Tony was the bass player in Pere Ubu at the period that they turned me on so much. And I'm very happy to call him a friend, and he's a great engineer as well. So we've been working at his very nice studio to record a new album, which will be 2 long side length pieces that we've done with this 10-piece band. And we're just about done with that, and hopefully it'll come out, I'm guessing, at the beginning of 2024, because I think the practicalities of getting a record out these days means it'll take a while.
So that Pere Ubu influence in your life comes full circle.
Yeah.
And did I also read that so $75 Bill is a duo, that you did some work with a marching band?
We've had various versions of our group, including a marching band. We first did that when the great record store here, which was called Other Music, was forced to close for economic reasons. I mean, the rent was crazy, and the music business was falling apart. And Other Music, which was a really important thing for a lot of people in New York, closed, and there was a lot of sadness about that. And we participated in a thing that was organized at a sort of New Orleans style second line funeral. I think we had about 20 people join us for that. And we've since done a few things. We've participated in a May Day march and a few other things. We've played some things like that. So yeah.
Are there any recordings of this marching band stuff?
We do have a cool recording of that Other Music March. Everybody's moving, and the person recording was moving too. So it's much more of a kind of environmental experience than it is a musical one. But you hear us. We begin our march by playing a version of Ornette Coleman's "Friends and Neighbors," which is a thing that our band has really focused on. To date it's our one big cover version, but it's something. The message of that "Friends and Neighbors" is something that's very central to what $75 Bill is. We really value this community that we've built up amongst our friends, and so we start with a version of "Friends and Neighbors," and then we go into this marching thing, and then we end with another version of "Friends and Neighbors." So you hear that over the course of this half-hour march, but you also hear a lot of police sirens and people yelling and car horns and stuff along the way.
Great. I love it. Can I hear this?
Yeah, we have plans to do some kind of release of it. It's not quite together, but yeah.
Okay.
It will it'll be available for people to be amused by sometime.
Sure. So should people go to your Bandcamp site to find your music?
It's all there, actually. Yes. Bandcamp is I think, really a great resource for musicians and fans too. I mean, yeah, and all of our stuff is there. We've been lucky to have a couple of different labels work with us and put our records out, but the digital stuff is available there on Bandcamp. Yeah.
How about to find out about upcoming gigs?
Also there. Yeah, that's probably the best spot. There are links, and there's one of the functions of Bandcamp allows a sort of listing. We have to get it together to actually put the things in, but if we do, they'll be there.
Right. Thank you very much for spending this time with me.
I hope it's helpful.
Oh, these are great stories.